Just to kind of kick this off, could you kind of just give our listeners a little bit of a background about yourself and kind of how you got to where you are today? Being like a skill acquisition specialist.
Hmm.
You've written books, you've got a very successful podcast, you've worked with the professional athletes and teams. Kind of just your journey of like what got you into where you are today and kind of how you are there today, I guess, if I said that right.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I'm a professor at Arizona State. I've been doing teaching about and studying skill acquisition for about 25 years now. It's a long
Mm.
time. Yeah, I was doing that for a long time, and you mentioned I started a podcast as part of my courses, and when I did that, I started to get teams reach out to me and kind of ask me questions. So I started to get more into actually applying it instead of just testing it. You know, how well this hitter, baseball is the main sport I work in. This hitter has a main this problem. What would you do? And I realized some of the theories and things I've been using are woefully inadequate when you actually get a situation like that. So I kind of changed my thinking and a couple of that, and then I got deeper and deeper into that consulting a lot of different sports. And the last few years, I've been a skill acquisition specialist first with the Boston Red Sox, and then this year and next year and into next year, I'm with the Chicago Cubs, who nicely are actually trained here in Arizona, so this is much more convenient for me.
Nice.
So yeah, working with them to kind of get more out of their practice, evaluate the players in terms of different metrics and how we should use all the data. Baseball loves data. How should
Hmm.
we use that in designing practice? So that's kind of my journey. It's been a long and winding one, but it's been a
Yeah.
lot of fun.
No,
Yeah.
that's great. And to kind of build on that, for some of the listeners who may not be familiar with ecological dynamics,
Hmm.
is there like an easy way to kind of sum it up, in a sense of like, what it is to be like an ecological coach or how to run
Hmm.
like a practice in that manner, ecologically? Because, I think, in a lot of sports, we've always kind of stuck to, drills that are kind of
Mm.
more repetitive than other. So any kind of, I guess, ways you can describe it, just kind of for someone who may not know too much about it.
Yeah, I think the key element parts of it are, we want to keep the skill when we train in context as much as possible in the game
Mhm.
instead of pulling a skill out, like teaching you how to dribble before you play basketball or so instead of isolating it and training it and repeating it and then trying to put it back in, we want to keep it in the game as much as possible. We want to allow for, instead of trying to kind of drill into you some ideal technique for throwing a lacrosse ball, a lacrosse pass or something. We want to
Mhm.
allow for what we call functional variability. We want to allow for different ways that you can do it, overhand, sideways, depending on the situation, um, and allowing the athlete to kind of find those solutions themselves, right? And the only
Mhm.
way that kind of connects to my first point, the only way you're going to allow them to do that is by having them practice against another person, right? If they practice throwing to some target or cone, right, they're not getting the information they need to adjust their throwing angle and things like that. So those are I think the two main parts of it. There's a lot of other terminology and subtleties to it, but those are so it kind of changes the role of the coach from the instructor. I know the proper way to do it. You come here and I'll tell you, to more of a guide, right? I'm
Mhm.
gonna help you find that. I'm gonna set up a practice environment that and add these kind of things that kind of encourages you to do things in certain ways, and I'm gonna guide you. So the practice environment is more the driver of learning instead of what the coach says too. That's part of it. So I think those are the main kind of key points.
Sure. Yeah, and kind of I think, when I think about, teaching, like you're saying, like when you're teaching with a large group, you can maybe, manipulate drills where things do kind of, drills do evolve from it, right? How we learn kind of like you said through representation. But, a lot of players, and especially our sports now, and you see in lacrosse, like a lot of kids are getting, one-on-one coaches or trying to do like really small group
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So as a coach, how, like you were just talking about, when you're going throwing against a wall, like if a kid or a coach, just has one or two people, what would be like a way to integrate kind of that atmosphere or environment for them where they can kind of use that, that learning through ecologically? Is that, I know some people talk about differential learning, Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned variability, and I think, a lot of that, it can go hand in hand, but like, is there a certain kind of way we can as coaches still instruct without having large groups to work off each other?
Yeah, I think, definitely if you have a one-on-one playing against each other is the best,
Yeah.
trying to shoot, playing one-on-one. There's a great study I talk about I have a new book coming out, by the way, right, in a couple
Yeah.
days. The talk about a basketball study where they looked at the difference between shooting with no defender versus just one. And the
Hmm.
differences are huge, right? It looks much more like it does in the game in terms of how many you make, how much variability of shots, how high you jump when you have what you just one defender on you. So that's
Yeah.
the big thing. But then, yeah, I think if you're absolutely by yourself, I think I think I always say variability is the lowest hanging fruit of practice. If you can add it, there's some famous stories of people that Don Bradman, a cricketer, he used to throw balls off his water heater, so it bounce off in weird directions, unpredictable directions. So
Yeah.
creating something like that, using some sort of app or something that when it does this, you throw here. So you kind of have to make you kind of what the one of the key elements for me is always, can we get some unpredictability in the way you
Hmm.
train? So you don't know exactly where you're going to throw it, what you're going to do before it starts. You want to
Yeah.
have to pick it up on the fly and make adjustments. So any way that you can do that, I think is a way you can make at home training better.
I work with a lot of players at the individual level, and I
Hmm.
used to, as a coach, I've talked about this. I've ever since I kind of, came across your stuff 4 or 5 years ago, and I started trying to learn more about it, of way to teach. I used to just be like, yeah, let's go rep it out, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff I do now, and maybe this kind of goes along with like the internal, external cues, which you can talk about as well. But and you can tell me how if I'm doing this right, but if I'm working with a kid, I'm trying to read and react off of a defender. Like I'm like a guided defender. I'm not trying to like, take it away from them, but I
Hmm.
want them to maybe read my hip movement or read something to trigger them to think I got to go that direction. And hopefully that skill, of them, exchanging hands and getting to that other side of the field emerges out of it.
Yeah.
But is that something that you think is on the right path? And is that kind of the internal and external cue concepts or vocabulary that you've talked about before?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That's a great example because the couple key one is you're getting them to control their actions based on the information they're going to use in a game, right?
Hmm.
The reason I move to the left is because you as a defender are going to the right, and I could pick that up from your hip movement, not because some light turned on or the coach yelled something or there's a cone here, but I'm
Yeah.
picking up the actual information that tells me where to go. So that and in terms of the internal external, so an external cue gets the athlete to directs them to something in the environment, their attention, whereas the internal cue gets you to focus on your body.
Hmm.
And there's a ton of research. And if you think about it, most people experience this themselves too. External is just much better, right? When you overthink what you're doing, you kind of get paralysis by analysis.
Yeah.
So when you say, look at my hips, that's an external. They're looking at you, which is out. That where you say, if you instead you said, make sure your elbows bent or make sure your knees straight or whatever, that's going to think in too much. And people get, I don't know how bad lacrosse is, but something like golf, I just watch people and they have so many thoughts in their head about what their body, so they're
Oh yeah.
paralyzed and they're not having any fun and it's just frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah. My brother, he was in the golf business and he was a teaching pro down in Florida for
Mm-hmm.
many years. And I didn't see him often. When I did, he would give me, I never really knew he was doing it, but he would just give
Yeah.
me like these external cues about,
Yeah.
something to look for, in my swing. And instead of giving me all these different things to, to
Yeah.
confuse me. And I would almost, and my dad's the same way. My dad loves researching and stuff, but
Mhm.
like, they would just give me like these little cues and like just that one thought process almost helped me through it, right? As opposed to them telling me to like break my hands at a certain direction. And I just,
Yeah.
and I try to correlate that kind of mindset now with like how I'm teaching lacrosse. But I just, like you said, golf, and I just like, it could be super
Yeah.
frustrating when you have all these different things that are mapped in your head that you need to do at every part of the swing.
Yeah. Yeah, like I've like for example, I was work with someone the other day and they were trying to get more loft, so they're trying to hit the ball at a steeper angle. And they had all these thoughts about where their elbows should be, shoulders should be. And I was like, have you ever fished before? And they're like, yeah. So I'm like, pretend you're casting a fishing line. So that
Yeah.
gets them to kind of go over it, and they kind of, yeah, it doesn't always work, but
Right.
I think it's just much better. Which it kind of, I think when you think too much, it makes you very robotic, and you're
Yeah.
unathletic when you're thinking about everything you're doing. And I think I've always had experience when I was an athlete. The best experience I had almost was I didn't remember what I did. I was kind of mindless. I was just let my body do it on its own. That's
Yeah.
what it felt like to me. Yeah.
No, I 100% agree. And I just had this
Mm.
conversation with someone else, like growing up, that I didn't have all these opportunities for, trainings and camps. There was only a couple camps. Like I would just go out on the field on my own and, think
Mhm.
about ways, and I would never do like the same shot over and over again. I'd always kind of change up my shot,
Mhm.
as a lacrosse player, because, that was my main sport. But like you said, it's almost like a feel thing versus like a specific, thing that your body needs to do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and lacrosse is like a sport, kind of like golf or
Mhm.
more like hockey, where it's combat. There's combat, but you're using like an extension, like a stick, right? Where you have to
Mhm.
use an extension of your body. And to me, that is a little bit trickier, and that's something I've been trying to figure out how to navigate, especially at the very youth level, like the youngest kids who are just learning how to catch, throw, or even
Mhm.
get a ground ball, because that's the foundation of the sport. If you can't do those three things, you're going to struggle.
Mhm.
So if I was like, looking at that age, like the youngest of youngest, 6, 7, 8, 9 year olds, like I want to stick to these principles.
Mhm.
Is there certain things that we can do like to try to work on that instead of them just having to do the same throw over and over again? Because you want them to have like, variability in the way they can
Mhm.
catch, feel confident, but that's been my biggest challenge, because I think the grip of your stick is really important. Like if you're holding the stick the wrong way, it's really hard
Mhm.
to cradle,
Mhm.
and it's really hard to snap your wrist to make a pass. And
Mhm.
I played hockey, so I see those two in, kind of correlate a little bit.
They're very, very good. Yeah.
But what, and from your perspective and your experience, what would be like a thought process of working with the youngest of youngest who just are being introduced to this sport, of any sport really, that has that kind of third arm element to it, that
Yeah.
external piece.
I think there's a bunch of different things. I think, I'm a big fan of demonstration. So you
Hmm.
show long what I try to avoid, tell people to avoid is talking too much. Say, watch how I bend my elbow. Just if people just watch, they take so much out of it on their own.
Hmm.
Um, you could change the equipment. There's lots of research showing, giving people, a lighter ball or a bigger, stick or with a bigger pocket and a bunch of things that make it a little bit easier for them to start. Like
Hmm.
there's research on using tennis balls that don't bounce as high or lower nets and rims and basketball and volleyball, things like that. Seems to help younger athletes. They can go right to playing and getting in the sport right away rather
Yeah.
than having to spend so much time by themselves. And I don't think there's, for me, there's some people tend to get over too stickler on this. I don't think there's anything wrong with if you see a kid doing something and they're not having success, saying, "Why don't you move your hands closer together?" I know
Hmm.
that kind of goes against what we are talking about. That's kind of an internal cue
Yeah.
and kind of telling them what to do. But I think as long as the way you present it, right,
Hmm.
instead of saying you have to do this and repeating it over and over, say, "Why don't you try?" and just see what happens, and then kind of just leave it at that.
Yeah.
I think that can be effective too.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
got you.
then kind of, I'm a big fan of like questioning too. After what do you think you could do differently so you make sure the ball didn't go high when you're trying to pass to someone, right? Get
Right.
them to think through. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think if we expand out to like, almost like the group space, if we are in a team environment,
Mm-hmm.
we have those individual skill sets that really want to work on, but then you have like kind of the team skill sets, of
Mm-hmm.
spacing and movement. Small sided games are super popular. I mean, a lot of people do them, and
Mm-hmm.
this is I'm fault of it too. But I used to just put kids in a smaller field and say, okay, play 3-on-3, and
Yeah,
almost just like free play.
yeah.
And the thought process of being like, the game, is the best teacher. But what I've been learning, especially off of like some of your stuff, and I also got integrated a little bit with Alex Sarama, what he does in
Mm-hmm.
basketball, of like what other constraints other than the field size am I adding into it to kind of get what we want to see? Like if I want the defense to learn how to like not get players to the middle of the field or not get a shot in the middle of the field, like how can I manipulate that 3-on-3 game so that doesn't happen, right? So can you talk a little bit about that, about
For
those
sure,
added
yeah.
constraints?
So I think there's a couple things. One is, I think, well, for on the one hand, what you're doing, just playing 3-on-3, is it's better than just drilling. Like
Yeah.
it's still, but I think you're right. I think we can do even better if we kind of design the game to target specific things that our
Hmm.
team's not doing, and that's kind of what we mean by the constraint. Let's call it constraints-led approach. We're going
Yeah.
to add something that kind of targets the specific thing. Maybe our team's not moving the ball enough, or they're not using spacing enough. So there's a bunch. Yeah. So you mentioned the number of players, playing area. You can pick the rules. You get so many for a points for a turnover versus one for a normal goal.
Hmm.
Uh, you can actually change the shape and kind of funnel people in, make it unbalanced. I'm a big fan of having kind of floaters, people that suddenly can become part of the offense or the defense and things like. So
Hmm.
there's a bunch of different, depending on what you're specifically going in there, especially in soccer. And Alex's book is great. He gives you lots of ideas of different how to do those. Yeah, for
Yeah.
basketball, same kind of principles, I think.
Sure. Yeah, and I think like you mentioned the CLA and the constraint-led approach, and the different types of constraints that we can incorporate on the field.
Hmm.
Can you talk about like kind of those three pillars of like the constraints that we can have between obviously there's some you can't change, like
Yeah,
the player and all that, but the other constraints that we can add to the game?
yeah. So there's the individual ones, the ones that you bring,
Hmm.
your height, your flexibility, your arm length, all those influence what you can do, right?
Hmm.
There's some kind of temporary ones like fatigue, right? Fatigue changes what we can do. We can manipulate. We could have people run laps before we did a skill drill and stuff. I actually do that some things, but generally we don't mess around with those too much. Environment is things, kind of general things like light level, weather, surface friction, those kind of things. Again, that you can't really manipulate, but I would encourage coaches, like, if you get one naturally, take advantage of it. Like, go out and play
Yeah.
when it's a little wet. It sounds
Yeah.
bad, but it's kind of good for skill to kind of have to adapt to those conditions. And the biggest one is the task one. Those are things that pertain to the specific skill you're, right. So the rules, the equipment, there's all a bunch of things. And there's a bunch of, for example, like in a small set game, you could change. I do a lot of work recently in MMA and stuff.
Mm.
So kind of the rules of engagement, you could make a rule so the defense is not allowed to. They're only allowed to move their sticks. They have to stand still. That's kind of
Hmm.
like constraining the opponent, right? Obviously, that makes it much easier to get around them. But for a newer player,
Yeah.
and we do that with MMA when you're matched up against someone that's much more skilled than you could make it a rule so they're only allowed to use their left hand or something like that. Kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. Obviously, you're not going to stay at that forever, but
Hmm.
so yeah. So there's about as many things so coaches come up with the most creative ways to do it. The size of the goal, the like a lot of the soccer ones, they put goals in different spate, like more than one goal. Uh, the size, all these different things you can vary that change kind of the demands.
Yeah. And, a lot of coaches, still, do live kind of in that traditional world. And I think both exist, both can exist. But I think what's your take on kind of both those kind of, theories existing on the same team? Like you have a coach that's really bought into, the ecological way, but then you have another coach that's kind of, really, honed in on like, no, we want to drill and rep this stuff out because, we've done it forever and it's been successful. So like how do you combat that to that coach who has been successful, right? But you
Yeah.
also want to bring this, this other kind of mindset in because it's like it's another way to really help the players develop both individually and as a team.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, no, I get that a lot. In baseball, I get that. For example,
Mm,
coaches like at major league level will have batters hit off a tee, right? Which I don't really like because you're not using the information about a ball coming at you. It's just sitting there,
yeah.
and other things like that. So, I kind of when I have a coach like that, I don't, obviously there's a reason they're in the major leagues. They've done something right, so I don't come and tell them stop everything you're doing. It's all wrong. Of course, I don't do that, but I kind of say meet them where they are. So,
Yeah.
what can we do with that drill to make it a bit more game like and a bit more variable? Can we move the tee around, change the height of the tee, uh, have someone throw a ball and you only swing when you only hit the ball off the tee when in certain situations. So, and I grab hopefully my secret agenda is to try to realize they getting further and further away from
Yeah.
it, and they probably do something else, and that happens about. But yeah, in general, I find if you're going to be really strictly technical coaching, it they don't really fit together too well. I
Hmm.
don't find, in my opinion.
Sure.
You're going to kind of have I think the way I think of them, the kind of traditional technical way, you're giving the athlete the solution, right? You're saying, here's how you swing. You put your
Yeah.
knee down, you do this, you do this. Um, in the approach in the CLA and stuff like that is giving the athletes problems, right? Hit this ball that's coming from this angle, or hit this big ball or this, and letting them find the solution. So you're giving them problems to kind of force them to move in a certain way. So they don't work together too well, I find.
Hmm.
A lot of people disagree with me. A lot of people still believe you need to teach the fundamental, here's how you hold a bat, here's the basics of swinging, and then let him do the more representative drills. But I think we're getting there. I think as long as we keep trying to make those ones a little more game-like, then I think it's working.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's, giving them a problem to solve. And I think that's really
Yeah.
ultimately like a really simple way to think about on the field, especially for a coach who's, trying to find more ways to get into it or learn about it, right?
Yeah.
And from your from your experience and your study and everything you've studied over the years, is there anything that you see about like specialization in sports, like with kids developing? Because in youth sports now, there's kids, specializing in one sport at like 10, 11, 12 years old. Whereas, it used to be kids would play all different sports through high school. And then sometimes they would go off and play college and have a successful career and then maybe get in, to the pros in
Hmm.
some sports. But do you find that I know this might be a little bit separate from, the actual topic, but I think it could go hand in hand because if kids are just playing one sport, I feel like they're losing that variability from other sports, right? Because you learn so much from different sports you can carry over, to others, from an IQ perspective
Yeah.
and from a skill. If you talk about like changing directions, reading
Hmm.
reading an opponent, so do you find anything there?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of things there. I think, especially when you combine specialization with the traditional repetitious low variability way
Yeah.
of coaching, practicing, like you're just putting so much repetitive strain on like a baseball pitcher that they're coached to try to repeat their delivery as much as possible. Damaging the same muscles exactly over and over again. So I
Yeah.
think if we could do more variability, but also, I really do believe in what you said. Like, there's just you can learn so much by especially for sports that kind of share. We call them donor sports in the ecological approach, right? So, soccer and basketball are both about space, right? Controlling
Hmm.
space, moving people. So is lacrosse, right? They're all invasion sports. They're
Yeah.
about exploring space, moving people around, getting. So I think you can learn so much. You can learn a lot from playing another one, and because you probably likely have different drills that you don't do in another sport, and so you're right. I think it makes you more intelligent player, more adaptable because you're getting more. And I think there's tons of research showing it's better for your mental health and a whole bunch of other things for kids to. But I understand the pull. On the other hand, if you there's a lot of research showing skill is very very specific, right? So if you want to get good at being a baseball player, you need to play a lot of baseball.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of a reality. So I understand the pull to complete specialization, but maybe unless you're planning on being the best elite, then it's probably way better for you to play lots of sports. Yeah.
Yeah. And I heard you talk about once, how players often when they practice and train, they continue to just try to, work to their strengths because they're getting positive
Hmm.
results every
Yeah.
time, right? And as opposed to really, focusing on their weaknesses.
Yeah.
Is there a way where you can take a strength, and really enhance it while also developing um, the weakness parts of your game, because especially in lacrosse, like it's the way that teams approach in some ways. Not to go too in depth with it, but we're attacking, in different angles now, almost like
Hmm.
towards the middle of the field, and guys are more one-handed, not playing two-handed.
Hmm.
So and that's like the biggest change I've seen in our sports, because it was like everyone was a two-handed player when I played, as opposed now it's like there's a lot of one-handed players. But from that standpoint, kind of what's your kind of take on that front?
Yeah, I think there's well, one thing I've you brought to mind, example of a constraint. I was talking to someone about ice hockey, and they were talking about a defender. They wanted to have one hand on the stick when they're skating backwards, and they had two
Yeah,
hands. And the constraint they used, they made him hold a tennis ball. They sewed it to his glove, and so he couldn't put two hands on the stick. That's
yeah,
kind of extreme constraint, but
right.
it does work. Yeah, I think, yeah, I understand that you don't want to focus exclusively on someone's weaknesses, and so they lose their strengths, right? I kind of think of, especially as you get more and more skilled and you have more and more strengths, kind of chipping away at the edges almost, right?
Hmm.
I'm good at this. I'm really good at this, but not in this situation when they play this. Like try to target like in my example, I'm a good fastball hitter, but not high fastballs. I'll really, really narrow it in on that specific thing
Yeah.
instead of spending too much time on things you're not the best at.
Hmm.
And being able to kind of recognize situations where your strength is going to work, you're going to fit, and where you can body up a player or something like that. So, yeah, I think getting the balance, that's the kind of the art of coaching. I think is getting that balance right.
Yeah. And you have an upcoming webinar on strength training, right? And how we
Hmm.
can incorporate that into our, kind of routines as well. Obviously, certainly we want to, let people know that it's there, and, point people to join, participate. But is there any kind of snippet or, little thing you can give us about, kind of what that will be about, and kind of what someone can expect to take from it?
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you for putting that in. I
Yeah,
have been, so I've been kind of on a mission for a while. I mean, not just me, but kind of making it strength and conditioning and warm ups, kind of integrate better with this, what we call skill training, where the coach comes in.
yeah,
For right now, typically they're very, very separate, right? You either go to the gym, you do a bunch of bench presses, whatever, you get stronger, or you run some laps, and then we'll start working on your skill. The two really don't talk to each other. So what I'm really trying to do is think of ways that kind of show people ways and activities they could do where they support each other better. So if we have a player that has this issue, we're going to work on this kind of what can we do as a warm up? How can we train what kind of strength exercises should we do? Right. For example, should we do a more rotational kind of movements or more linear movements like a best bench press? Um, should we do, I'm a big fan of kind of things that challenge the stability, like the aqua balls and things like that. So I had to talk about how to use those kind of implements. So making them work together. So basically, again, it's this idea of transfer. So when you get stronger or faster or whatever, better agility in the
hmm,
gym or the practice, making it actually show up in the game
sure,
by having them linked together. Yeah.
sure. Yeah, and I think, you know, about 5, 10 years ago, I saw some athletics departments in high schools and colleges, put their athletes more in like CrossFit style training, right? But
Mhm.
that,
Yeah.
even though it's different and it's more dynamic, it maybe doesn't correlate specifically to their sport, right?
Hmm.
So I think like approaching in a way where you're trying to correlate it to what you're trying to accomplish is something that a lot of kids should focus on, as opposed to like maybe just trying to go get the best bench press they can, for the highest bench
Yeah.
press. I mean,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, like we had, example we had in baseball, we had a guy, they're working on their speed, the typical way, sprinting, so,
Mhm.
straight line running. And they're not the best base stealers on the team, even though they're the fastest and you measure them. So,
Mhm.
some of the things we do is like have them run in a circle, right? So it's more like circular, the same kind of running you do on a base, have it more close to that. and kind of having to make a decision of when to stop and start and things like that,
Yeah.
adding some elements of that in it. So yeah, getting a little more representative of what you're actually going to be doing. So I'm going to throw lots of ideas for that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
great. And I'll definitely be joining that and listening on
Awesome.
there. So I'm
Yeah.
excited for it.
Yeah.
And just, as we kind of, narrow it down here, but like, where do you see, the skill development, and like kind of the research that you're on and learning about going in the next 5, 10 years, right? Because I think like for me, I mean, this ecological approach really,
Mm-hmm.
is, just like I said earlier, a few years old for me where I've really, tried
Mm-hmm.
harder and harder to go, and I didn't know much about it. Do you see it I mean, I think more and more people are grasping to it just based off of, conversations I have with coaches. But from
Mm-hmm.
your experience, where do you see it going from here, from that standpoint?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sometimes I feel like, wow, we're making great headway. And then other times I feel like maybe I'm just in an echo chamber. I just talk to people that are, but yeah, I think it's going to go into more and more areas. I heard people talking about using constraints that approach for training musical instruments. And I mentioned I do work with police now and stuff. So I think it's hopefully getting in more and more sports, more and more examples. Um, I think, some of the trends I think we're going to have, I don't know how exactly they're going to fit it. One is working, the data in, all the motion track, the markerless motion tracking, all the stuff we're going to be able to do. How can we use that to inform kind of the design? The
Hmm.
other thing I think is going to for sure happen is kind of AI remote coaching, right?
Hmm.
You're going to be able to stand in front of your phone and make a few lacrosse throws, and it's going to say, nope, your form's wrong, right? I'm sure that's coming for pretty
Yeah.
much for every sport because
Yeah.
it's so easy to do now. It's trying to integrate ecological ideas with some of those instead of just saying no, straighten your arm, right?
Right.
Um, I think I think it's doable, but I think those are kind of trends in sports that are coming. Uh, and then, we haven't talked about there is an interesting body line of research within this that this helps reduce injury, right? By because basically you're telling people don't do things exactly the same way every time, which
Hmm.
puts less stress on your muscles and joints and things. So I think understanding injury and maybe looking for markers of when people are going to be susceptible, managing workload and things like that. Those are some of the things. So kind of integrating with some trends that are already happening.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can make that, we really try to sell being adaptive for the athletes. So it's up to us as researchers and coaches to be adaptive also. Yeah.
Yeah, and the injury standpoint, I don't have like the data to like say that
Mm.
this is right or I'm wrong on it, but for me, like, I played a lot of sports growing up. I was lucky not to have many injuries. A lot of my friends didn't have any, but
Mm.
now that I'm coaching at high level, at high school and college, I see almost the same recurring injuries happen,
Mm.
whether it's like hip labrums, in which I've never even heard of, but I knew three
Yeah.
kids that did it, this
It's
past year. Like,
yeah.
and I know my mind goes to think like, well, maybe it's because, we're so repetitive in our movement,
Yeah.
with our legs that we're not challenging it to be more adaptable, and maybe those things happen. So like that's just
Yeah.
me thinking as like an average person, but I have no
Yeah.
data to back it up.
No, I think it's I have a book, new chapter. I might keep plugging my stuff, but
Yeah.
in my new
Yeah.
book there, I talk about injuries from a dynamical systems, which is the dynamics part of ecological. I think it's really like for me the most interesting. Like I'm sure those hip injuries when they occur when they're not doing anything special, they're just
Hmm.
running or
Yeah.
jumping, right? And
Hmm.
suddenly it goes, why didn't that happen before? They did that same move 1,000 times at least, and never something that one time. Same with me in baseball. Pitcher throws 100 of the same pitch, 101 elbow goes, ligament goes. So it's
Hmm.
understanding what happens before then. I think what's happening is your body is adapting to kind of maintain performance, right? It's keeping you throwing hard by using smaller muscles and putting more force in places it probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
So it's kind of its own worst enemy, right?
Right.
If you push it, it'll allow you to keep going,
Hmm.
but eventually it's gonna come back
Something
and
will break, right?
yeah. So So kind of can we detect those kind
Yeah.
of changes in coordination that occur before we get a catastrophic injury? Yeah.
Yeah, that's super
I think it's a
important.
really interesting area. I'm starting to dive in that a little bit myself. Now that I have access to data and stuff from teams and
Yeah. And I even wonder whether like the environment, like the fields that we play on, like everyone now plays
Mhm.
on artificial, right?
Mhm.
And we always used to play on grass where you
Yeah.
slipped, there was a lot of give. But
Yeah.
now you don't, you slip, your cleats get stuck, right? So
Yeah.
I think that might play a role as well. But again, that's just
Yeah.
me thinking as like as a just like a coach with no, knowledge in
No,
the actual data.
I
But
think there's something to be said for that. Like when you're talking about playing, like just playing around,
yeah,
and like there's a bunch of research showing that, countries where they like Brazil where they just play in the street, they play soccer with
yeah,
whatever players they have.
hmm,
There's rocks on the field. There's sometimes not even a field; it's a beach or something.
right,
That kind of it adds kind of good variability, even though and then now kids you grab them early, you're under 6, 10 star, we'll put you on this perfect field
yeah,
playing all the time. It's yeah, my example is I running, I'm doing less and less now, but I used to be a runner. I switched from road running to trail running
mm,
and my injuries went way down. So
yeah,
pounding the same exact thing. Now I run up and down hills. I'm constantly having to change my stride length, the angle. And I think it's good. I like it more, but so
yeah.
I'm probably biased, but it might be just a placebo effect. But yeah, so yeah, I think there's something to the environment as well.
Yeah, not to veer off there, but I always a lacrosse player, so everything I ran was sprinting. It was always
Uh-huh.
sprints, sprints, sprints. And then post college, when I stopped playing, I wanted to continue running. I started doing distance running, but I
Hmm.
realized that the running I was doing, I was like, I was reaching and I was pounding, and my hips were killing me, my knees were killing me. Like, why does this hurt so much? And then I started learning about cadence and changing
Yeah.
the way you run for distance, and it's made all the difference in the world for me. But it was just something I would never even think of until I was finally in pain. I was like, all right, something's got to change, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, for
but
sure.
like you're saying,
Yeah, that kind of the mechanics of being a good sprinter don't really it's
yeah, right,
not gonna work very well once you go past,
right.
kind of the forward what you need to go fast. Yep, they're different. But some of those runners pretty much sprint the whole marathon and stuff. It's unbelievable now,
Oh
but
yeah, it's
yeah,
crazy.
so go. But cool.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, and to kind of finish off here, you run the Perception Action podcast, right? And I
Hmm.
highly suggest to follow people. It's great. Um, if you were kind of take like what you talk about, on your show and on your podcast, is there something within that you wish every coach, whether it's youth or high school, can take from it, and to kind of follow up from that. If I was a coach and I want to somehow, try to start integrating this into my, my daily practices with my teams, what would be kind of I think we alluded to it earlier, but what would kind of be the easiest way for me to just kind of like, start it and, obviously continue learning about it, but just to start integrating it with, with my players.
Yeah. So a couple of the one you're right, the one we already mentioned, kind of variability.
Hmm.
Variability does so many good things when you add it, right? Okay, you want to use the basketball, the layup lines, or whatever. Change the angle, change the distance, put someone standing in the way. Little ways you can, that will have so many benefits for so many reasons. I think that's an easy one.
Hmm.
And then kind of, can we make it a little more game-like? Can we make it a bit more unpredictable? Using other people as the main. I coach basketball with my coach, and I always when we do laps, we have someone defending. For example, I never let kids just go. They sometimes are a bit behind them, but I never let them just do it on their own. So I think that, and I really the quote I used earlier: think about giving your athletes problems and challenging them a bit. Right? We didn't really talk like failure. Failing is a really important part of learning. Failing a little bit, right? If you do everything perfectly, that's what we want in the game, right? That's performing, not learning. You have no incentive to try something different. You have no kind of so I have this great graphic I use in presentations from Mountain Dew. It's a skateboarder landing this perfect trick, and then beside is all the times he's fallen and learning to do that. Right? You
Yeah.
need to learn. You need to fall a little bit to learn, and so challenge him a bit, push him a bit. Um, it goes away. That's a hard thing to do as a coach because it makes practice a little messy and chaotic.
Hmm.
Instead of perfect neat lines and everybody making the perfect, like it's really easy. Like I don't know if lacrosse has a version of the 3-man weave in
Oh
basketball,
yeah.
like where they
Yeah.
pass going up and down the court. Looks perfect. Pretty everyone catches the pass perfectly, but it's so unlike there's no defenders. Everyone knows exactly what's going to happen beforehand.
Hmm.
If you make, a small sided game where they have to pass, they're going to throw the ball away, turn it over sometimes. Looks messier, but it's way better for learning for
Yeah.
sure.
Well,
Yeah.
that's great. And I mean,
Yeah.
I appreciate you being on here. I think it's
Oh,
been
my
super
pleasure.
insightful for me, and I know you're busy there and making some time here. But if people wanted to find out more about you and the books that you've written, where could they find you?
Yeah, so the best single place is I have a website, perceptionaction.com.
Hmm.
Perception action, all one word.com. Uh there you find it's called the Perception Action Podcast. Not very creative naming. It's all so you'll find a link there, a page with all my books, events. I host kind of a coaches meetup where we talk about some of the challenges of trying to coach this way and that we face, dealing with parents and their
Yeah.
comments and things like that. When are you going to start coaching? That's
Right.
when. Um, so we that's a lot of fun. So you find it kind of, and I have some general information about constraints that approach and things like that, resources. So
Great.
yeah, so perceptionaction.com is the best place to go.
All right. Fantastic.
You're welcome. You're welcome, right,
Well,
Brett?
this has been great.
Oh yeah, thanks, Brett.
It's been awesome, and
Mm.
I've like I said, I've really enjoyed your stuff, and I've learned a lot. So I appreciate all that you do.
Cool. You too. Thanks.
All right, you got it.